What if I told you trying to calm an anxious child is like trying to pour in more positive energy into something that is escalating negatively, right? We're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to teach them to breathe, to, calm down, right? But are we really helping them learn how to manage their anxiety? Probably not. Because the opposite of anxiety is not calm, it's clarity. And oftentimes, even ourselves, we don't know why the anxiety keeps rising. And then we feed into the anxiety by thinking about it over and over and over again. It's exactly what your child is doing when they are displaying anxiety. And so I know we want to teach them coping skills. And I agree, coping skills are important. But they don't actually give clarity. So it's like you're trying to pour more positive into negative, and it's this constant battle. And we often say in psychology and psychiatry that you have to counteract a negative thought 25 plus times for that negative thought to actually go away. So there's this constant battle of anxiety, grounding, anxiety, positive thought, like anxiety, trying to stay calm, anxiety, trying to do breath work. But if we don't actually figure out the anxiety, we're not teaching to manage that anxiety. My name's Dr. B. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner with over 25 years of experience, but I've also raised 7 children, 5 of which were adopted, 2 biological. I had children with mental health diagnoses. I had children with chronic disease, so medical complication, children with developmental disorders. And I've personally been through some significant loss. I've lost 3 of my children and my husband over the course of 20 years. So I understand anxiety and fears and the difficulty in raising kids. It's not a simple do this plus this and your children will be fine, right? But there is 3 simple things that I teach over and over and over again that will help you in any situation. So when you think about your child's anxiety, I also want you to stop and think about your own anxiety, right? What is anxiety? Well, it is a biological response. So your heart rate increases, you might sweat, you feel uncomfortable, right? That is the physical response of our body. Anxiety is a normal experience. Everyone experiences anxiety, but it's a continuum. So mild anxiety actually allows you to function better. So if you think about a child who is doing well, not necessarily having problems with anxiety, and there's a test coming up at school, and they're like, there's this test coming, I want to do well on it, I'm going to study tonight, right? That's mild anxiety. What's moderate anxiety? Oh my gosh, I have a test, I don't have time to study, what am I going to do, right? And it interferes with the productivity of the studying, but they can get it done. Then you get into severe anxiety and panic anxiety. And in severe and panic anxiety, you can't function well. And moderate anxiety is supposed to really be reserved for real emergencies, right? Somebody gets hurt and you need to respond and there's a lot of anxiety around making good decisions. But we often, as a culture, so if your child is experiencing anxiety, I also want you to look in the mirror. Are you able to manage your anxiety? And when I say manage anxiety, I do not at all mean make the anxiety go away. Right? Because mild anxiety is super productive. It allows us to make good decisions, to be productive, to move forward. So anxiety is normal, is the point of all of that. But what do you do with it? How do you actually bring it down to mild and able to kind of think through that. So the 3 words that I teach over and over again is think, organize, and choose. Are you thinking through the anxiety, or are you feeding into it? And I think we often feed into our anxiety, and we're like, oh, I'm thinking about it. But are you getting to solution-based anxiety, right? Like, are you able to bring it down? So when we think about thinking, as it relates to anxiety, I want you to think about if your anxiety was a fire, are you putting gas on it, or are you putting water on it with your thoughts, right? It's not that I'm saying make the anxiety go away. I'm saying, are you feeding into it, or are you doing something to decrease it? So that's the first thing, thinking efficiently. So let's say you can honestly say, oh, I'm putting, gas on this fire. But why? Why am I doing that? And we really need to understand this think, organize, choose process for ourselves as the parent before we can help our child. If you are anxious and then your child is anxious, I bet you your child's anxiety is feeding into your anxiety. But why? And this is where the organizational piece comes in. Why are you anxious, right? What goes deeper than that? What are the negative dialogue that you're saying in your head? Are you saying to yourself, I'm not a good parent? Are you saying to yourself, I'm never going to be able to fix my child? I don't know what your negative narrative is, but I bet you if you're struggling with anxiety, there's a negative narrative there. So when we talk about organizing, we talk about putting these things into different categories so that we can do something about it, right? Because when we say, oh, I have this anxiety, I'm trying to do breath work to decrease my anxiety. But the real issue is that you're talking negatively to yourself. So it doesn't matter how many times you take deep breaths. If you continue to say those negative things, they will begin to surface, or they are the things that are feeding the anxiety. So when you do like my whole Mentally Strong Method course, we teach something called a thought map. You don't have to understand the thought map to be able to do this think, organize, and choose. But it allows you to think efficiently. Like, it allows you to ask questions like, why do I think like this? Why do I feel like this? Then sometimes grief and trauma and injury, behaviors and choices and things come up when you do this thought map. So when your child is telling you that they are anxious, I want you to ask questions. What are you anxious about? What's the worst thing that could happen? What's the thoughts in your head? So that we can organize those instead of just, telling them to take a deep breath or doing grounding exercises. I am going to give you some grounding exercises, and there's a worksheet down in the description of working with children and doing grounding exercises. Grounding exercises are super important. What I don't want you to think is that you do this and the anxiety should go away, right? We need to figure out what is fueling the anxiety. But sometimes the thoughts and the anxiety are so wound up that we can't really talk about like choices to think positive, or maybe there's grief or somebody hurt their feelings, right? We can't really talk about those things until we can ground them. So when you're talking to your child, let them talk, right? You're letting them get it out. You're asking more open-ended questions to try to figure out what's underneath. So maybe you do find out that they are saying negative things to themselves, or somebody hurt their feelings at school, or the teacher said something really negative when they made a mistake, and so now they're really upset about this next test, right? Like there's more to the story than just the anxiety. And so when I say, can we bring the anxiety down to mild, that is a choice in the what we call the anxiety category, but it doesn't help the negative thoughts or whatever else is fueling. So you would have this conversation about thinking and trying to ask questions that go a little deeper and figure out where the anxiety is coming from. And then you would do this grounding exercise, and you would teach them this grounding exercise, right? Because when they are anxious at school or not around you, right? What are some things that they could do? Well, you can focus on something, right? So on my camera, there's like a red dot. And if I get anxious, I can like stare at the red dot for a second and just allow myself to, have empty space, right? Like being able to just distract and calm that down. Touch something. So when we think of grounding, the best would be outside in nature, right? Because there's actually ions that come off of living things. But it works in all situations, right? So you're looking at something, you're trying to touch something, you count backwards sometimes is even more helpful. So if counting forward doesn't help, counting backwards, right? Because counting backwards, you get to an end. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Like there's an end to that. And then you choose to think positive. You choose to say a positive statement. I can be stronger than my anxiety, or really talking to your child to come up with something that resonates with them. One of the things that I see, and I'm everything that I teach, I'm guilty of having done raising my children. But we often, like when our child says something negative, we come back with, oh my God, of course you're smart, right? Like, so if your child said, well, I don't think I'm smart. And you're like, oh my God, you're so smart. But that honestly doesn't mean anything to them, because that's what you believe. But if they're telling you that, there's a part of them that believes, that they are not smart. So it's more of a dialogue around, okay, what makes you think that you're not smart? How can we change that? What are some things that you are smart in? So let's say it's math that is kind of the problem at school, and that is what all the anxiety's around. Say, well, what are you smart in? We often ask kids, what is your favorite subject? I hated that, because I always was like, well, the one where I didn't have to do hard work, right? But what are you smart in? And I realized as an adult, retrospectively, I was super, social, and we now call that emotional intelligence, right? I was able to really see the big pictures of things. I could strategize. And so I now know that I am smart in very specific ways. But if we could start those conversations earlier with children, that just because this area is hard for you, that doesn't mean we still want you to, and under the behaviors and choices category, we still want you to choose to try to do well in math and in reading or whatever the struggle is. But we also want you to understand that you are smart. And that needs to come from within them, not from what you believe, right? Because it just doesn't hold power. You can say it, but they don't believe it when you say it. It's got to be a statement that they believe themselves. And so going back to this think, organize, choose, I want you to always remember these 3 words. Whenever you're talking to your child about something that relates to their mental health, their emotional health, or their spiritual health, are they able to think through what's going on? Organize it. Right? What are the pieces of this? This is not, yes, there's anxiety here, but what are the other pieces? And then we're going to make choices. So what do we choose? So if you identified in your child that they have negative thought, how do we help them choose to think positive? We can't just tell them to think positive. We have to help them learn that skill of thinking positive. And so that is the choice piece of this, but it has to be a choice of your child. So I'm going to end with challenging you to maybe look at some of my other videos around anxiety of how do you manage your anxiety. And if you click the link to get the kids worksheet, you will be invited into my ecosystem, my newsletter, courses and things that we teach, okay? So join the community, learn the Mentally Strong method so that you can take care of yourself first and then take care of your children.